Give me the brief bio, where you grew up and how you got here.
Sure. I was born and raised in central Pennsylvania, mostly in the town of Williamsport, PA. Actually, South Williamsport across the Susquehanna River, home of Little League Baseball and me. Anyway, I was raised there. I went to college at St. Bonaventure University, which was a family school. My mother was born and raised in Olean, and I was the 9th member of my family to go to St. Bonnie's. Love it. Always did love it. And then I came home for a year. My parents at that point were in Pittsburgh, and I worked at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. That was my first big newspaper job. I had a couple little things in between, but that was the big one. And then I decided after a year at home, working nights at this paper in a town that I didn't know anybody because they moved there after I was in college. So it was like, I'd get up at 11 o'clock and watch Andy and Mayberry and go to work and stay late, and it got a little boring. So I went to grad school. That's one reason to go, but I also was interested in it. I went to Syracuse. And at Syracuse, I met my wife, which was funny because she was from the same hometown in Williamsport. We figured out later, we went to rival high schools. We were at the same games, but the opposite side of the field, that kind of thing. But we didn't know each other. And then a friend who knew we both were from Williamsport thought it would be a yuck to introduce us, and we discovered for ourselves. It was not more than a yuck, it was a lifetime love affair. So we've been married now for, we'll be 50 years in 2020, it would be 50 years. So it's 48 years now. Anyway, I went to grad school. Then after that, I liked upstate New York. I thought Syracuse was I liked Syracuse because it was fun while I was there in grad school, but I didn't like the newspapers. And then I thought I admired the papers of Buffalo, but in those days, in 1970, Buffalo was not the queen city that apparently it has become since. And so I looked at Rochester, had this new up-and-coming company called Gannett that came here. I was a rewrite man initially, a job that they don't even have anymore. It's for evening newspapers where you have to write on deadline as the day goes along because of the different deadlines. And people would be out in the field and they'd phone in the news, and they didn't have cell phones and they didn't have iPads. They just had a quarter in a telephone booth. They'd call me and I'd, get the old get me rewrite thing. And I would rewrite the stories. And one of the stories I rewrote was the story that won the Pulitzer for two of our reporters for the Attica Prison Rebellion story. So I didn't technically win the Pulitzer, but I wrote the story that won the Pulitzer, which is bizarre, but it's a reporter's award, So then let's see, after that I became an editor briefly. I didn't like editing. It was a whole different thing than I didn't find the creative satisfaction I got from writing. So I decided to go back to writing, and at that point I kind of thought maybe it's time for me to really go what I really am interested in. I was really, really crazy all my life about the movies. So I asked to become a movie critic. They were then using a freelance guy out of New York, and I said, well, I'm on your payroll anyway, let me do it. And I also covered early rock and roll. By early, I mean the second generation of rock and roll, bands like The Who, and when they came to town, I would write about that stuff. And then eventually jazz, because I was the only guy around there that knew about jazz, and I wrote about jazz. And those things stayed with me pretty much, not so much the rock and roll when Jeff Spivak and other people came on board, but I did do jazz and continued to do them until just very recently when I pretty much hung up the writing thing, but we'll see how that goes. But and then we had, my wife and I had 3 kids, and they all 3 got married, and we now have 6 grandchildren scattered about the globe. Mamaroneck, New York, St. Augustine, Florida, and Appleton, Wisconsin. And so we like to travel a lot, and I wrote a book, collected a lot of my material from my Gannett years called From My Seat on the Aisle, and I added some new stuff to it, and that's my book that's out, still available. And after I retired in 2007, for 12 years I did a freelance column at the newspaper. It was on every Sunday, and it was about all these things that I normally write about, movies and music and whatever, and occasionally some other oddball stuff. And then just last week, I said that would probably be my last one in terms of the regular column. Gannett and I have both left the door open a crack in case there's something specific that they need help on or that I feel like I'd like to do that I may do. I mean, I could envision maybe like the Jazz Festival or something, I don't know. But we'll see. That we'll have to wait and see. But I'm done with the regular deadlines. That's 12 years after retiring. I think it's maybe time to retire. I used to say that rocket chair on the porch was not for me. Well, it's more and more it's for me.
Age has a way.
That's right.
What made you crazy about the movies to begin with?
I think I saw that they were a way to explore all sorts of things. I mean, you know, thanks to the movies, I've been on the top of Mount Everest. I flew with Peter Pan. I swung on a rope with Tarzan, if I could find a rope strong enough to hold me. And I got to experience all those great life things. And also, even when there's a negative experience, you know, you see the storming of the beach and Saving Private Ryan or something horrible like that, you at least learn about it by watching it, and then you also know that when the lights come up, you're okay, and you learn from it, and so you get the experience, but without the really the experience, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I also found them as a great travel log, learning about the world, and enticing me to want to see a lot of it myself. I just found it a great art form, but I love music a lot too, and I always say that when I was a kid, with my dollar allowance, burning a hole in my pocket when I was about 12 or something, I'd cross the Susquehanna River from South Williamsport to Williamsport, where the movie theaters were, and I had a choice of either taking that dollar and going to the movie and having plenty left over for popcorn or jujubes or something, or to buy the latest 45 record, because I bought a lot of those too, you know. And so those were the interests that I had, and I was blessed, really blessed, that I was allowed to take my passion and my love of the arts, and particularly those popular arts, and wrap my work around them, wrap what I did for a living around them.
How do you go into a movie that you have to review? What type of prep, what type of mentality do you take into the theater?
I try not to, well, the days, obviously you're talking about more in the past, because I don't really do that so much anymore, but what I did do is I tried not to read reviews. I don't want to be influenced by others. I would read them after the fact, after I saw it, see how many of my friends or whatever are agreeing or not agreeing. But I wouldn't do it beforehand. I would learn a little bit about the film, and especially the history of whatever it's talking about. I mean, if it's an historic film, I like to learn a little bit about it. And this is the days when you actually had to look at a book or something. It was before you could, Google it, and do a little research about it. I also would know the filmmakers. I mean, I was really pretty knowledgeable about filmmakers, always have been. Not just the stars, but who makes the movies. And so I know a little bit about the history of it. And also if there's interesting technology at play, whether it would have been like Cinerama or 3D or something, I would want to know about that as well. So that all said, I would then go into the movie, and people ask me if I take notes, but I really almost never did. Because every time you bend down to write a note, or even your brain thinks about what you want to write in that note, that's something you're missing in the movie.
Yeah.
I want the whole movie to envelop me, and then think about it. And it's a trade-off, because I would then miss not being able to quote a specific line that I remember was spectacular or something, because I didn't write it down. Once in an extremely great while, it's so great a line that I fumble for my pencil and something to write on, and I'll write it down. But I generally don't take notes in a movie. I take a few notes after. Of course, you can find a lot of material about the movie and the making of it with these press kits that they give you, but they always try to make every movie sound like Gone with the Wind, so you have to be a little wary of that. But there's ways to find out most of the things you want to find out. And today, more than ever, you can find out everything and anything, and probably too much.
Yeah. What's one review, when you looked back on it, you thought, man, I missed the boat on that one?
Probably a couple, but one I can think of off the top of my head, and I'm not alone. Well, there's two. One that was Taxi Driver, which I originally thought, the great De Niro Scorsese film, I thought it originally was pornographic. I mean, just really gratuitous, violent porn. And I came to realize that it was just the opposite of that. It was a really powerful story that had a lot of violence in it, but it was really giving a message about the kind of people that can be in our society. Because he's that cab driver at the end of the film. He's going out looking for another pickup on and who knows what could happen. He's still there, and he's considered a hero for what he did, when it was pretty awful what he did. Although he did save a little young girl from prostitution, but at what cost, kind of thing. So yeah, I had to sort of come to grips with that movie and come to the realization that it's actually a masterpiece. Another one that the whole nation, including me, and I wasn't writing now, but I was watching, and I was starting to think about it, and I could have been writing if I was a little older, and that was Bonnie and Clyde. That's the great movie that's always used as an example of people in the business changing their mind. Because when that Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway film came out about those two gangsters, that movie, in a weird way, was designed to make you care about them and sort of like them. and yet they were cold-blooded killers, and so it was sort of the rise of the anti-hero, and it also seemed to make light of it. I mean, they had that bluegrass score, that kind of music bouncing as they bounced along the highways in their Model Ts and all that. And I think that we had to come to a realization that Beatty and Arthur Penn, the director, were creating kind of a new anti-hero form, and that you're not necessarily supposed to admire these people, but you try to kind of understand them, I guess, a little. I guess the old saying is even Hitler liked dogs. There's something about everybody that you could say that about, but that doesn't mean you have to, nor should you like those people.
Yeah. How about a review that was ahead of its time, that you saw a movie that not many other critics saw and it has since come to the fore?
That's an interesting question, Adam. I'm very proud of the fact, and this is not a heavy one in that sense. It's more of a lighthearted kind of thing. But I was very proud that I was told once by one of the studios, I forget which studio did it, that my praise of The Black Stallion had more people see it per capita in this community than anywhere else in the world. And I think I saw it as one of those amazing children's films that transcends childhood and that any adult could appreciate. And it had that gorgeous Carol Ballard cinematography, and everything about it was so great. And so that was one that I might have been a little ahead of the curve in appreciating, and now it's come down to be considered a classic. But it's not a major. I can't think of a major. I'm sure there's something, but maybe even it's the discovery of older films that because where we are, the Eastman. We are so lucky in this town to have the Eastman Museum with its Dryden Theater and seeing movies every night of the week. I mean, I saw a movie 2 nights ago that Joan Crawford was in that hasn't been seen in 90 years. They restored it. So that's exciting to be able to tell people about that. And so I was sort of one of the people that kind of helped turn the world back on to Louise Brooks. I wasn't the main one. The main one was Kenneth Tynan, who wrote about her for the New Yorker. But I also wrote a lot about Louise and knew Louise real well, and helped get people to understand that they get sometime in their life they got to see Pandora's Box or whatever.
I guess that goes to my next question then. I'm guessing you encourage people to go back and watch the older movies, not just to keep up with what's coming out now. And if so, why is that so important?
I think it's important because great art can be developed at any time, and you can learn something and be moved by something. It doesn't have to be fresh on the shelf today. It's true of literature. It's true of painting. If you only look at 21st century painting, you're going to miss Impressionism, and lots of other things. And the same thing is true of film. You get a really appreciation for the greatness of what you could call the old masters of cinema. And also the other thing that's related to that, sort of a side related to that, is foreign film. When I grew up and was starting to watch movies, to me, a big part of it were the foreign films of people like Ingmar Bergman and Akira Kurosawa and Federico Fellini and all these great filmmakers and Francois Truffaut. These people were making movies and we in America were embracing them. They would be showing at local theaters, and so not the true popcorn palaces of the Midwest or whatever, but I'm just saying in most urban areas and most artful communities would have these films. That whole thing has kind of disappeared. And now you can count on one hand, nay I say one finger, the foreign language films that show up in the common marketplace today. That's one reason I was so thrilled with the most recent Oscar race, in that there were at least 3 or 4 films that got a lot of buzz, 2 especially, Roma and Cold War, that were both, first of all, they were both black and white, which is also kind of unheard of, and I love beautiful black and white. I think it can move you in different kind of ways than color. And then I also love the fact that they were subtitled and you can see them. I mean, I remember when I would teach films at Monroe Community College, I had students, and on a given day I would show a foreign film, and I could hear them moaning and groaning, and oh, you mean we got to read this thing? We got to read it? I says, well, only if you want to see something of the world that's not America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or England. You want to see the rest of the world? You got to read it. So, I mean, that's important to me, I think.
Yeah. The evolution of film, what parts of it have you been applauding? What parts of it have you been bemoaning?
I'll take the bemoaning first. The bemoaning for me is mostly, I don't mind the streaming and the fact that we can watch it at home generally because we all now have pretty good sized TVs. I got a 55-inch flat screen with, with surround sound. So I can do pretty good, and I don't have a crying baby or somebody answering a cell phone in front of me, So I don't mind that anymore. I used to say it has to be in the theater. And it's still great in a theater if you have a good audience, and that's ideal. But that kind of thing is not so bad. But what is bad is these smaller screens. I mean, how anybody can ever watch. I mean, I can't even conceive of watching Lawrence of Arabia on a cell phone. I'm sorry. It's not meant to be, So it bothers me when the screens get small like that. And watching too much stuff at TV, Fellini had a great quote once where he said, watching a movie on a big screen is like seeing a film theatrically. I mean, it's like a dream in the middle of the night that you just totally believe in, and you wake up thinking you experienced it, whereas watching a movie on TV is a daydream at best. And that's because televised films and films that are easy to watch sometimes give you the freedom to multitask. I always tell when Roma was making the rounds over the last couple of months, and I guess it's still on Netflix, I tell people, don't multitask. Don't do your books, and don't play words with friends, and don't iron, and don't do anything. Watch the movie, because the movie takes a while to envelop you, and you got to experience it that way.
The positive aspect. What do you love about where this has come?
Let's see. I like the diversity of filming. I mean, by that I mean the filmmakers. I like the fact that there are women. This year the women were very strong, and people of color were very strong. And I like the fact that we're getting those voices back in the cinema. They've been around for a little while. I mean, Sidney Poitier as an actor a half century ago, and Spike Lee as a filmmaker for the last 20 years or so. But it's nice that there's more of those folks, and so you're getting more diversity, more independence. And I think that's all good. And the fact that there are these different outlets, I think makes it financially feasible to make films, where it would once time be, you would think, well, if it doesn't make it in the multiplex, it's not going to make it at all. Well, now it doesn't necessarily have to make it to the multiplex. Sometimes they go directly to streaming, or they go directly, to DVD, although DVDs are kind of fading. But those different forms you can go to, and that helps pay for a movie that maybe you wouldn't be able to make otherwise.
My last question for you is, when you take an old film, how do you reconcile perhaps some of the stereotypes and things that wouldn't be acceptable now, themes, but there's also beauty in the film? And this is tied into my other question, is an artist who's flawed, who has done bad things, but the art itself is wonderful. How do you reconcile those things?
Well, you just said it. The art is wonderful. I know just this last week, there's been a lot to do about John Wayne. Now, I'm not going to say John Wayne's art was always beautiful. He had his moments even as an artist that were pretty wooden and not great. But he also had amazing moments. The Searchers is my all-time favorite Western with John Ford. And most of his stuff with Ford was quite brilliant. So I think that, despite your opposite political views, and even before this story broke, I knew he was pretty conservative. And I personally am not. So that, but I just got over that. I do remember coming right out of college that when he was making things like The Green Berets, his horrible Vietnam movie, and he made a lot of pro-war statements and all that, I sort of said, I'm not going to pay any attention to John Wayne. I later came to regret that. I mean, I said to myself, why do I cut off the movies, if they're good ones, for that? And the same with, a lot of people talk about Woody Allen. Now, I think, first of all, I'm not so convinced he did a lot of what they say he did. I think that's a whole other issue. And I think that I'm kind of on his side in a lot of that. Sung Lee was never his daughter. It was Andre Previn's daughter. And I don't believe that other incident that people raise out. So that's just me. But that all said, even if it was true, the fact remains he was one of the great and original comedic filmmakers of his generation. And I think we still honor the art. And if you think of all the other art forms, Picasso wasn't always a great guy. Whoever. You can say that about a lot of artists. You can say that a lot about writers. A lot of writers, or painters, or people who do all kinds of great stuff. And I think you have to enjoy the art, learn from the art, experience the art, and then you can think to yourself, well, I wouldn't want to elect this guy president. I wouldn't want him in my club. He wouldn't be a friend of mine. Whatever you want to, however you want to put it. Maybe he belongs in jail even. But if whatever that is, the artwork stands alone, in my opinion. Like Phil Spector's records. I love Phil Spector's, the Wall of Sound stuff, the Ronettes and all that. He's a murderer and he's in the Slammer. So
Yeah, I hear you. I lied to you. My last question is, I'm not going to ask what your favorite movie is because I think it's a little hackneyed, but I will ask this. What movie do you think influenced you the most in your own life?
Can I give you two?
You can give me two. I'll change it.
Thank you. One is On the Waterfront, which I am so proud. It came out in '54, which by my math tells me I was 9 years old. And the fact that I got it. Now, I didn't get the background meeting. I mean, this is a movie made by Elia Kazan, who testified in the McCarthy hearings, and a lot of people see it as a defense of the fact that he testified and named names, and they see that as a defense of that. And I didn't know any of that, but I still saw it as a very powerful movie about corruption in the mob, and there's so many. And I think even then I recognized how great Brando was. I maintain that in the 120-year history of film, no performance has yet equaled Brando and On the Waterfront. I just think it's an astonishing performance. So that's one, and that influenced me as a young kid going up in terms of what I like to see. Another film that influenced me a ton was One Day at St. Bonaventure. I grew up in a small town of Williamsport where I didn't see many foreign films. In fact, I don't recall ever seeing any. I once snuck into And God Created Women with my older brother because it was the church had condemned it and it was rated X and we wanted to see that, but it wasn't what you call great cinema. It was just a lot of skin. And by today's standards, it'd be PG-13. But anyway, but I hadn't seen a lot of foreign films. So when I was at St. Bonaventure University, a professor decided to have a film club, and he had his film club, and he invited people to come, students to come. Unfortunately, only 2 came, so it was the one and only meeting of the film club. But that night he showed an Ingmar Bergman film called The Virgin Spring, and with the great, I'm sorry, my brain just shorted out, but it's a great movie, and I loved it, and it just made me understand what I just said earlier about kids and going to the movies, man. You gotta see all kinds of films, and the fact that this was subtitled and from Sweden and about a Swedish myth didn't take away from the fact that it was a very powerful film about human beings and the way they react to things.
Yeah.
So I loved The Virgin Spring, and Max von Sydow was the actor, by the way. I want to retrieve my I can't even just. It takes a little longer to find the Grace House once in a while, but there it was. It was Max
There
von
it was.
Sydow. Anyway, so those would be 2.
Very good. Anything else that you'd like to add that I might have missed?
No, other than I really feel grateful for the career I had here and for the people that read me, and I also feel grateful for this being in the community with the beautiful Eastman Museum and all it has to offer. So it's been a good life, and it's continuing.
More to come.
That's it, babe.